Why would someone admit to a crime they didn't commit? Taking someone's life, sexual assault, something they didn't even witness, let alone do. It's one of the most disturbing psychological failures in modern justice. Not because these people were weak, but because the human mind is wired to survive, not to resist. Under enough pressure, fear, confusion, and isolation, the brain does exactly what it's designed to do. And in one of the most infamous cases of all, 5 boys would confess before they even understood what they were saying.
Education.
In New York City this morning, a jogger is fighting for her life after a brutal attack in Central Park.
A woman had been attacked, brutally beaten, raped, and left for dead. It was a crime that shocked the city and terrified the public. They needed answers. They needed someone to blame, and 5 Black and Latino teenagers were about to become the targets.
When those grandmothers say, "But he's a good boy. He never did anything," don't you believe it?
They were just kids. Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, Antron McCrae, Yusef Salam, and Corey Wise. The youngest was 14. The oldest was 16. They weren't together that night. Their stories didn't match, but none of that mattered, because the police weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for a confession. Each boy was pulled into questioning alone. No parents, no lawyers, just hours and hours of adult voices pushing them to confess.
Were you trying to touch her?
Not really.
Didn't you tell the police earlier today that you had tried to grab her, and that's when you got scratched?
No, not like feeling her up.
Okay, not like that.
Stop it.
But you tried,
Grab the arm or something.
you tried to grab her arm?
Trying to stop it.
They were told the others had already talked, that confessing was the only way out. They were exhausted, terrified, and confused, and they didn't know that everything they said was being recorded and twisted. This is the first stage of coercion, the stage where fear and confusion begin priming the mind for control. Their minds weren't processing guilt or innocence, they were processing survival. After hours of isolation, lies, and intimidation, something in their minds started to shift. They weren't being asked to remember, they were being told what to say.
Is that the woman that you saw?
Yes.
Is that sort of the way she looked when you saw her?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
The interrogators fed them details, the victim's clothing, the location, the weapon, and the boys repeated those details back, because after enough pressure, repetition becomes belief. This is how memory is manipulated, not with force, but with suggestion. When the pain of confession becomes unbearable, the brain starts to cooperate, not to reveal the truth, but to escape the situation at any cost. One by one, each boy gave a taped confession. They described a version of the crime that didn't make sense.
What were the others doing while Kevin was struggling with her with the wrists?
Anton was going for her clothes, and Lopez was holding her arms.
What was Kevin doing while Steve Lopez was holding her hands and hitting her with the brick?
He was having sex with her.
Where were you standing?
I was on the side of Kevin.
Were you watching?
No, I was grabbing lady titties.
The timelines were wrong. The details contradicted each other.
Did you see Anton have intercourse with her?
Yeah,
Was he laying on top of her, or was he kneeling, or was he...
laying on top of her.
Okay. How long was he on top of her?
For a short while, then Raymond went.
They named different people, different roles, different events.
Did somebody have sex with her?
Yeah,
Did a lot of people have sex with her?
yeah.
Okay, first it was the black guy, then it was the Puerto Rican guy with the black hood, then you got on top of her.
But somehow that didn't matter either, because they'd said the magic words, "I did it." They weren't confessing out of guilt. They were surrendering under pressure. These were survival tactics from children who thought if they just said what the adults wanted, they'd be allowed to leave. But they never left. Not for years. They were convicted and sentenced to between 6 and 13 years in prison. They lost their childhoods, their education, their freedom. And even when DNA evidence came back with no match to any of them, it was ignored.
I showed her the top of the entrance, the direction she came by. I showed her where I picked up the tree branch and down the road where I dragged the end. I'm the one that did this.
It wasn't until 2002, more than a decade later, that the real attacker confessed. His DNA matched the crime. He acted alone, and the state finally admitted what had always been true. But you don't walk out of an experience like that untouched. What happened in that room, in those endless hours of questioning, rewired something inside them. Fear, confusion, exhaustion, used the right way, can overpower the truth, even in the mind of a child. And as you'll see in the next case, when you're too young to understand the rules, the game is over before you even know you're playing. Brendan Dassey was in class when it happened. 16 years old, learning difficulties, no criminal record, and no understanding of why he was being pulled out of school. But within hours, he'd confessed to rape and murder. And it wasn't because he was guilty. It was because he was impressionable and completely alone. This isn't just a story of what was said. It's a case study in how easy it is to reshape a mind that hasn't learned how to defend itself. Brendan was taken to a small interview room by 2 detectives. No lawyer, no parents. Just Brendan, 2 adults, and a camcorder. He didn't know what Miranda rights were. He didn't even know he could say nothing. And that's because Brendan wasn't thinking like a suspect. He was thinking like a kid trying to be helpful. He was completely defenseless. And this is where it starts.
Brendan, I want you to relax, okay? A little more comfortable here and stuff. And what we like to do, you had a couple days since we last talked now, which was Monday, and you had a chance to reflect and breathe, I imagine. Just
not with pressure, but with politeness. He was asked to help, to fill in the blanks. The detectives smiled. They reassured him. They promised he wasn't in trouble. But behind their calm tone was a strategy. Lead the subject, reward agreement, and repeat the process. The detectives started planting ideas.
What else happens to her in her head?
extremely, extremely important you tell us this. For us to believe you.
Come on, Brendan. What else?
We know, we just need you to tell us.
That's all I can remember.
All right, I'm just going to come up and ask you. Who shot her in the head?
They weren't asking questions. They were leading Brendan with suggestions while he slowly built a false memory.
You cut her hair off? Yeah. Where did that happen?
They were handing Brendan the script.
Did you cut her hair off? No. Then why did you just tell us you did? Brendan.
At first, Brendan gave vague, empty answers. He said he couldn't remember, that he wasn't sure, but the more they pushed, the more his words started to reflect theirs. They told him what had happened, and he agreed. Because the longer it went on, the more he believed that's what they wanted. He didn't resist because in his world, giving adults what they wanted was the fastest way home.
How long is this going to take?
It shouldn't take a whole lot longer.
Do you think I can get there before 129?
Probably not. What's at 129?
Well, I had a project due in 6 hours.
Okay. We'll worry about that later, okay?
Eventually, Brendan gave them what they wanted. He confessed. He said he helped his uncle Stephen Avery rape and murder Teresa Halbach. He described events that didn't line up with the evidence. He mentioned weapons that didn't exist. He even guessed at details, looking for reactions in the detectives' faces to know if he'd gotten it right. That's not the question of a killer. It's the question of a kid who doesn't understand what he's just done.
Did you? Huh?
Not really.
What do you mean, not really?
They got to my head.
He thought the confession was the end. But for the system, it was just the beginning.
As to count 1, we, the jury, find the defendant Brendan R. Dassey guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as party to a crime. As to count 2, we, the jury, find the defendant Brendan R. Dassey guilty of mutilating a corpse as party to a crime. As to count 3, we, the jury, find the defendant Brendan R. Dassey guilty.
Despite no physical evidence tying Brendan to the crime, despite inconsistencies, despite a recorded confession that looked like it had been spoon-fed, he was sentenced to life in prison. Later, court after court reviewed the footage. They called the interrogation highly improper. One judge ruled the confession was coerced. Another overturned the conviction entirely, but the appeals system reinstated it. To this day, Brendan Dassey remains behind bars. Not because of what he did, but because of what he agreed to. Under pressure, he didn't know how to resist. This is what happens when suggestibility becomes a weapon. The mind can be rewritten not by trauma, but by guidance. When trust is used as a tool instead of treated as a gift. When you talk to a child like he's a criminal. But if Brendan Dassey was too passive to fight back, what happens when the pressure isn't soft, but brutal? Daniel Williams was a Navy sailor. Quiet, hardworking, no criminal record. He'd just gotten married. But in 1997, his neighbor, Michelle Moore Bosco, was found raped and murdered in her apartment. Daniel was brought in for questioning. He didn't know it yet, but over the next few months, 3 more sailors would be accused of the same crime. They weren't hardened criminals. They weren't even all friends. But together, they would confess to a brutal crime they never took part in, because the pressure never let up. And eventually they broke, one by one. Daniel Williams was interrogated for over 11 hours. He denied the crime again and again, but the detectives didn't back off. They doubled down. They told him he failed a polygraph, that he'd never see his wife again, that the only way to save himself was to confess. After enough time, the brain starts shifting from resistance to compliance. Not because the person starts to believe they're guilty, but because they stop believing there's a way out. Daniel finally confessed, and when the story didn't make sense, the police said he wasn't alone. So they brought in the next sailor and started the same routine all over again. Joseph Dick Jr. was the next to fall, then Eric Wilson, then Derek Tice. Each one interrogated for hours. Each one told the others had already talked. Each one shown details that made the story feel real, even if it didn't match the evidence. This is called memory conformity, when people start to adjust their version of events to match the story they're being told, even if it means inserting themselves into something they never experienced. It sounds impossible, but as we saw with the Central Park 5 and Brendan Dassey, with enough psychological stress, the brain's priority shifts from remembering to surviving. The more they resisted, the more pressure was applied. They were isolated, lied to, and manipulated. And each time they gave an answer that didn't fit the official story, they were told to try again. Eventually, they stopped trying and started agreeing. The final picture painted by police was chaotic. 4 men, 1 apartment, a night of unspeakable violence. But the timeline didn't match. The DNA didn't match, and the men didn't even agree on what had happened. Still, the confessions were enough. Daniel, Joseph, Derek, and Eric were all charged. 3 pleaded guilty, 1 went to trial. They were sentenced to decades in prison, because in the eyes of the court, a confession trumps everything. These weren't evil men. This is the psychology of collapse under systemic pressure, not personal guilt. They were exhausted, misled, and alone. Their stories didn't make sense, but after enough pressure, they said what the interrogators wanted to hear, even if it meant believing it themselves. Years passed by. Then finally something changed. A man named Omar Ballard confessed to the murder. His DNA matched the scene. He'd acted alone, and unlike the Norfolk Four, his story never wavered.
Back now with a big payout and even bigger sense of closure in the case of the Norfolk Four.
4 Navy sailors will now receive a total of more than $3 million, approved by Governor Northam. The 4 have been dealing with this case since 1997. That's when they were wrongly convicted and imprisoned for the rape and murder of Michelle Bosco.
Eventually, the truth was undeniable. In 2017, 2 full decades after the arrests, the governor of Virginia gave them full pardons. But what they lost can't be returned. Time, trust, and identity. And all because their minds, under extreme pressure, followed a script they didn't write. False confessions don't come from weakness. They come from persistence, from manipulation, from power used in the wrong hands. It doesn't take violence or threats to break someone down. Just time and control. And most people think they'd never fall for it. But in the right room, under the right pressure, anything can happen. Because the tactics used in these rooms weren't accidental. They were systemic, and they're still being used today. 3 different stories, 3 different decades. But under the surface, the same psychological forces were at work. These were the outcomes, the predictable result of pushing a vulnerable mind through a system designed to extract, not to understand. The most common ingredient in a false confession is coercion. That doesn't mean physical violence. It means psychological pressure so intense, the person starts prioritizing escape over truth. This is known as maximization and minimization. Interrogators exaggerate the consequences of staying silent and downplay the consequences of confessing. You're looking at life if you don't cooperate. You'll go home if you just tell us what happened. This is manipulated decision-making under distress, not casual persuasion. Some suspects break because of suggestibility. They've been primed to agree, even if it means fabricating a memory. Others fall to memory conformity, adjusting what they remember to match what they're told. This is how the Central Park Five each signed a confession, implicating the others. It's how Brendan Dassey ended up describing weapons that didn't exist. It's how the Norfolk Four all gave different stories about the same night, and none of them had the power to stop it. Why? Because once an idea is implanted under pressure, the mind can start treating it as the truth, especially when it's exhausted, isolated, or just young enough not to know better. False confessions don't come from thin air. They come from systems designed to win. And for the people sitting on the other side of that table, it's a game they never had a chance to survive. If you want to dive deeper, we've attached a source list down in the description. Like, comment, and share this video with someone who still thinks false confessions don't happen. This was the psychology of innocence under pressure. Now, let's study evil in its purest form. Click here to dive into the twisted minds of the world's most notorious psychopaths. Thanks for watching.